Hey there, my name is Alexis, and I'm going to show you how I made this simple two-tiered litter box platform. So I have three litter boxes, and as you can see, they take up a lot of space. So I want to have everything all condensed just into one corner, and I figure I can make a table that holds one litter box over the other, and I can free up a lot of floor space that way. I just need to make sure all three litter boxes are still accessible to the cats, as well as accessible to me for when I need to clean them. So this whole build will be made out of a sheet of plywood. You need to cut two square pieces, one rectangular piece, and then a few strips of plywood that are going to make up the leg pieces, as well as some support pieces that you'll see later on. I cut the strips into four pieces that are about 21 inches long, and those will make up the table legs. My cats are average size and they don't have any issues going in and out of the litter box, so I think 21 inches should be more than enough space for them. You could probably even get away with 20 inches if you want. Next, I drill pocket holes into each table leg. As you can see, I'm using the heavy duty pocket hole jig, but I'm only making 12 pocket holes total for this build, so you definitely don't need this type. You can use the simpler pocket hole jig if you have that one. Next, I install the table legs into the tabletop, and as you can see, the orientation of the table legs are actually different at each end. And that's just because I want to maximize as much space as possible underneath the table, and orienting it this way will work for all three letter boxes. Once you see it, you'll kind of understand what I'm talking about. So the table legs aren't as rigid as I would have liked, so I'm cutting these little triangles to add some rigidity to them. And it's probably because the plywood I purchased is very light compared to, let's say, like Baltic birch plywood, so there's going to be a bit more flexibility there. And to add a bit more stiffness to it, I added this horizontal piece to one end of the table legs. And to attach the triangular braces, I just used wood glue, and I used blue painter's tape to hold them in place while the glue sets. And I think wood glue is more than strong enough here. It's not going to be taking on a lot of weight and a lot of movement. So to have the litter box be easily accessible to me from underneath the table, I'm going to be using cabinet drawer slides. It's pretty easy to install the slides. I use a carpenter square to keep the slides straight before I pre-drill holes and then install the screws. I use the power drill to almost fully tighten it, and then I completely tighten it with a screwdriver. You may notice that I'm installing 4 screws per slide, but based on the number of screws they provide you in the packaging, you should be only installing 3 screws per slide on each wood piece. I then used a small speed square to make sure the edges of the wood pieces are flush with each other so that there's no overhang, and then I can install the remaining screws into the slides. But you may want to hold off until after you've painted the wood pieces to install the slides, because some of the paint covered up some of the screw holes and it was hard for me to properly reinstall them in the same holes. So just wait until after you've painted them. To cover up the plywood edges, I used iron-on edge banding, which I've used for most of my plywood projects as they work really well. But this time I actually picked up the melamine version instead of the wood veneer edge banding that I normally get. And in terms of quality, I definitely like the wood veneer version much more. I also picked up this trimmer that's meant to remove the excess edge banding, and it worked a little bit. I did get some tear out in some places, but I think it's because the quality of the plywood isn't that great. I think it might work for something like Baltic birch, but after that I just used a razor blade for the remainder of the edge banding removal, and then I cleaned everything up with 220 grit sandpaper. I would just wear gloves if you were to use a razor blade, because you may get a bit of scratches on you, but I've been pretty comfortable using razor blades for most of my edge banding projects. Just be careful not to cut into the plywood. Once you get a hang of it, it's pretty easy to use. Although it does take a little bit longer, you do get more control if you're using a razor blade versus a trimmer. Although if you're using Baltic birch or good quality, maybe the trimmer might be the better option. And if you are going to use an edge banding trimmer, you should install your edge banding prior to assembling all your pieces, because once you hit certain corners, you can't use the trimmer anymore and you have to use a razor blade or something. So install the edge banding prior to assembling everything if you can. And all that remains is to sand the surfaces and the edges, make sure there's no sharp corners that your cat might bump into, and then remove any remaining dust so that it's ready for paint and primer. And I did about 2 coats of primer and about 2 to 3 coats of paint. with light hand sanding in between coats to remove any rough spots wherever needed. Once everything had fully dried, I reinstalled the drawer slides, used my carpenter square to make sure everything was flush with each other, and then installed all the screws. As an additional feature, I picked up this handle that's meant for cabinet drawers just to help me slide the litter boxes in and out more easily. And to install it, I used painter's tape and a piece of 2x4 underneath the plywood just to minimize tear out. And then I just use a power drill and a screwdriver to install the handle. And after that, we're just about done. All that's left is to clean up the space and have it ready for the sliding platform and the tabletop. And I know in the video I used a table saw and a miter saw to help me make table legs, but in reality you can use just a circular saw. As long as you have a straight edge and a carpenter square, you can make your long cuts and your cross cuts very easily. It just might take a little bit longer than if you had a miter saw or table saw. At first, I was a little hesitant into making this because, there's a small chance that the cats might not use the litter box on top. Fortunately, it took about a week or two for them to get used to it. Now they regularly use the litter box on top. And you don't need to have more than one pet to actually have this. You can have one pet and use the space underneath or on top as storage for cat litter or cleaning supplies or whatnot. You're still going to save floor space regardless. So thanks for watching. Hope you liked the video. If you have any questions or comments, let me know down below. If you like it, give it a like. Consider subscribing. I'll be posting new videos very soon. Thanks again, and take care.